Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Adi Klevit here, the host of the System Simplified podcast, where I feature top founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And today's episode is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group, where we create, document, and implement processes and procedures so businesses can grow and thrive. And today's guest is Andrew Barnes. Hi, Andrew.
Hello, Adi. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Good, thank you.
Excellent. Well, Andrew, we're going to have an amazing conversation today, and I'm so looking forward to it. We're going to talk about the 4-day week. Now, you wrote a book, you have your website, you are definitely the promoter of it, and we're going to have a conversation about what it means, what it takes for companies to actually implement it, at least try it out, right? I mean, as you like to say, it's not necessarily something that is mandatory, but it's something that is out there. It's something that it's worth trying. And how do you actually get to that 4-day week without losing productivity? But I must say also not without losing productivity, but actually hopefully increasing your profitability, maintaining the productivity and increasing profitability, and a lot of other, good effects that come with it. And with that, let me just do a little bit more of a formal introduction. So you are an entrepreneur, you are a philanthropist, but you are most widely known, as I said, as the accidental evangelist for reduced hours working the 4-day week. And we're going to talk about how it all came about. But I also want to give a big shout out to Jeremy Weiss from Rise 25, who introduced us. And you also did a podcast with him, which we're going to include in the show notes in case people want to hear more, because I'm sure we're going to cover some of it, but there is more to learn. So I'm really thankful for you being the guest on this podcast. And let's get started.
Fantastic.
Okay, so you are director of Coulthard Barnes, Perpetual Guardian, New Zealand's largest charitable crowdfunding website. I mean, it goes on and on, right, in terms of all of your accomplishments. So well done. And you're also an adventurer. You just told me that you were going to do this car ride from Beijing to Paris in 36 days in a 1941 car. I mean, this is amazing, right? So you're definitely not living a boring life. Let's put it like that.
Well, you've got to get off the net somehow. And I find it... I find when you're driving in the middle of the desert somewhere, people can't get hold of you. It's actually very therapeutic.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Andrew, let's talk about the 4-day week, right? I mean, that's the dream.
Mm-hmm.
It's a dream, right? Because then you can use the other 3 days to...
I'd like to think it's a bit more than a dream. I think that this is a reality now. And part of it is understanding what we're talking about, because when we talk about a 4-day week, it's clickbait. Let's be honest. We're talking about reduced hours working, equivalent of 4 days, so 32 hours, but on full pay. That's full 5-day pay, 38, 39, 40 hours. But, and this is the key but, it's got to be linked to no drop in productivity and output. Okay, so we call this the 100-80-100 rule, 100% pay, 80% time, 100% productivity.
Interesting. So you're looking at basically at the week, it's still 8 hours a day for 4 days.
Well, not necessarily, in that we can have people who would, for example, somebody will take a day off, a couple of people will take half a day's off, 2 half days. But actually people like working parents may well work 5 days a week, but compressed hours. So the game here is find the solution that works for an individual in your organization, but reduced hours. Because the trick with this is people will do extraordinary things if you give them the right incentive. And the right incentive in this model is more time, and it's more time to do the things that are important to you.
I see. Now, let me ask you a question, and you might, do you think that this is desirable for everyone? Meaning, like, would you encounter employees that will say, I don't have anything to do on my other day. I mean, I much rather be at work and, have the water cooler conversation or go on Facebook from time to time and just stretch my time. You know what I mean? I mean, have you ever encountered that?
Yes, about 15%. Well, so my company does a 4-day week, right? At any point in time, about 15% of the company works a normal 5 days. Now, there are two groups in that. One is anybody who joins the company, we make them work a 5-day week initially for a couple of months. And that is purely so they remember how pretty awful it is when they are switched to a 4-day week. And also so they understand what we're looking for in terms of output in a 5-day week. But about 10% of the company, you're absolutely right. They don't want to work a 4-day week. They are perfectly happy to tick along the way they're doing now. And I think, you mentioned it, and I think it's right at the heart of this. Spend a bit of time on Facebook or the internet or a bit of a chat. And that's our problem often as business people, because we're not that clear on how much output we're getting from people. We use time as a surrogate for output. And so quite a lot of the day is wasted. And part of the whole ethos of the 4-day week is not to create a sort of a monastery-like environment where everybody works all the time, but actually to understand what is needed to be done and the output that we need to see, and to eliminate those things that get in the way of that. Now, a bit of that is going on the internet. We found in Perpetual Guardian, when we introduced this, that internet surfing on the top 5 non-business related websites in New Zealand dropped 35%. So people started to say, I'm not going to waste time on the internet. I'm going to get on with my job. So, there is a little bit of elimination of those things. But the most of the rest comes down to a combination of attitudinal, environmental, and systems.
Interesting. Okay, so let's talk about it. So let's say one of our listeners right now are thinking, oh, I want to see how I can actually go to 4-day week. Where do I start?
Well, the start point, it's a lot easier than it was, I have to say. So I say I'm an accidental evangelist for this, because one of the things that happened is we announced that we were going to do this in my own company. And we thought we were going to get, one article in the paper, maybe an interview on our local TV station. We stopped counting when we hit 14,000 articles globally. We had a global audience of 5.5 billion. We were the second most read story in the New York Times after the Trump-Putin summit. Everybody was interested, and that caused us to publish our research, our data, but also to create 4-day week global, which is a not-for-profit. And what we do is we help companies go on the journey of a 4-day week. So the start point is if you're interested, is you go to www.4dayweek.com and just have a look at the data that's there. And there is research reports from our trials all around the world, plus, tricks, tips, books on how you actually do it. So the starting point is just do a bit of research.
Absolutely. Okay, so you do the research, like any specific areas to look at, or any specific thing to concentrate on when you're doing the research?
Yeah, you've got to decide whether your culture is right.
Okay. So what would make a good culture and what is not a good culture?
The problem with this is this requires a high degree of trust between employer and employee. So usually when we say to people, we want to work more efficiently, what people hear is, there's going to be job cuts and you want me to do more to make up for that. Now, the 4-day week is entirely the opposite. I want to reduce your time. I'm not going to reduce your pay, but the quid pro quo is I need you to work more efficiently. Now, if you don't trust me, you think it's going to be the traditional form. When I've shown you all of those improvements, you'll fire half of us and you'll want us to go back to 5 days a week. So culturally, you have to be clear that this is something that, as a leader, you say is, I think is not just good for my business, it's good for my people. And I believe that we will get a better outcome if we do this. So the start point is you've got to have trust. The second point is you've got to have the confidence to ask your people what they would do differently and listen, because this isn't a top-down process re-engineering exercise. It's actually a bottom-up. Okay. Because often the things that get in the way of productivity are lots and lots of small things which would never bubble to the surface in a big process re-engineering exercise. And part of that is also understanding that individuals have got to have an appreciation now that it's not just about what I do, it's how does what I do impact on other people? Because if we're going to do this, we've all got to be successful in terms of being more efficient. It's not good enough for me to fix my process if I stuff up somebody else's process along the way.
Absolutely. And that's where the processes and systems, you mentioned the system is one of the things you look at. That's where processes are so important, right? Mm. Because if you don't have your processes defined, how can you make it more efficient or how can you make it more consistent, right?
Indeed. But I think there's one thing you've got to determine in front of that. And it's the number one question we always get asked. People look at us as we've got a couple of heads and they say, but okay, so you want to work less time and productivity stays the same. And then they said, well, how do you measure productivity? Bang, there it is. So if somebody is asking you, how do you measure productivity? What they're admitting is they don't measure productivity themselves. So the start point with this is understanding how you measure output and productivity. Now, that means often you have to create new matrices, if you will, for what people do, because you haven't been measuring output, haven't been measuring those things before. And we certainly had to do that in our company. And it's one of the big things that we help companies with when we're going in the trial process. We're saying you've got to sit down and try and devise those things. At the end of the day, in due course, you can measure profitability, you can measure revenue, but actually you can do that at the end. You've got to measure other things when you go on the journey.
What would be some of the things that you are measuring?
Well, it depends on your business. I mean, my business, for example, is broadly a combination between legal services and a financial services business. So I've got some people I can measure very easily. I have got time and attendance charges, so I can have a look at your percentage of hours that you're billing and the percentage that you're not billing and how many hours are accounted for. But then I've got call center stuff and I can't do that. So at call centers, I might think about the number of calls that are being handled, but it's not just the number of calls, it's the type of calls and so on. And then I've got people who work in a rather more advisory capability where I'm not using either of those matrices. So what am I thinking of? Am I starting to look at the amount of documents that maybe they're looking? I have to go through and come up with something that gives...
And then measure the output, not necessarily the action, right? I mean, because...
The output. What is it looking for you to deliver? Because at the end of the day, it's output that drives revenue, that drives profit.
For sure. Okay, so it's measuring. You have to have measurements, so you know that you are measuring and you're not losing money. And then you do have to have systems in place, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, we find that systems are a key part of this, but they're not the only part.
Of course, because it's never only part. It always has to be part. It's integral. I mean, you can't just run a business just if you have like perfect systems. You have to have the right culture. You have to measure. You have to have the right leadership. It's all together, but it's holistic. You have to look at all of it together.
Yeah, the starting point for me was a series of surveys that indicated that the British were productive for 2.5 to 3 hours a day. Now, when you start to look at that, you say, well, is that happening in my company? What is it is causing that? How do I eliminate a little bit of that? And actually, behavioral, attitudinal changes will account for some of it. The next thing is that we've often built things like, open plan offices, which is possibly the single greatest invention to destroy productivity in the history of the world. Because in an open plan office, you generally get interrupted once every 11 minutes. It'll take you 22 minutes to get back to full productivity. So if you are doing that, you have to think about things like, deep work, quiet hours, etc., in order to change that. That gives you something. Then you've got people who say, look, I'm going to stop going on the internet. I'm going to not waste a whole pile of time on personal phone calls or personal admin. That saves a bit more. But then what happens is people say, righto, now I've got a better understanding of what I'm trying to deliver. Now let's go and look at the system side. And what can we do? Often very small tweaks initially to improve processes so that you're saving maybe 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. Not much. This is not big system rewrites necessarily, but it's starting to look at how you eliminate those roadblocks that have actually held up often productivity. Now then, after you've rebuilt your business, which is the interesting bit, it's the journey we're currently on, having redesigned our business, we're now putting in a full new system because we've actually looked at how we've got the business more efficient. And therefore now we're able to look at measurement criteria far better than we did before. So the old system we had actually didn't hack it. We have to move it on. So it in a way, the big build comes at the system bit comes at the end of the redesign, and the redesign starts with the employees.
Yes. So now let me ask you a question. Let's say we have certain professions where you have a certain amount of output that is measured by, it does have to be measured by time because you only have that many. Like, let's say, for instance, I'll give you an example. So let's say you have an estimator, you have a construction company and you have an estimator, and you expect them to see 6 customers a day, for instance. So maybe an adjuster, an insurance adjusters, and they go out and they see 6 people a day, which what is allowed them to, that's what you can do in 8 hours, right? I mean, you can compress, you can see 8 people in 8 hours, right? Because you have the drive time, whatnot. And the expectancy is that they're going to see 30 of them a week, right? If I'm going to cut their time to 4 days a week, how they will have to then either work longer hours, right? Or I will have to cut down on their output, at least in terms of the amount of people that they see.
The number one thing we do with this is we say, look, don't try and invent a solution for a business you're not in.
Mm-hmm.
because the number one objection, if you will, to 4-day week is people will look at you and they'll go, well, it wouldn't work in X.
No, but I'm talking about, let's say we have a listener that is, that's their business right now.
It wouldn't work in whatever it is. It won't work because you've got to do this. Now, first of all, I can guarantee you that somewhere in the world there is a company that's working a 4-day week and doing it. Right, that's number one. You will find that. Number two is, that's the whole reason we say you start with your employees and you run a trial. Because what you've got to do is work out how you're going to do that. Now, in the example you've just given me, well, who said you had to drive? Why don't you Zoom it? Why don't you eliminate the travel time? Actually, how much time is spent gathering information? Could you gather that information far more efficiently beforehand? So when you go there, the problem is a much tighter one, right? Or, and I don't want to fall into the trap to try and develop the solution. My point about this is that there are better ways of doing this, right? I'm quite sure way back in the day when we introduced a 5-day week, 1920s, somebody sat there and looked at their horse and said, you know what? I can only ride at 5 miles an hour on my horse. So how the blazes am I going to get to that town in time to do that? And then somebody invents the car. And you can. Or invents the plane. And you can. Or the internet that now means I can do it at the speed of light. The reality is our world has evolved. How we do business has evolved. How we work has not evolved. That, to me, is the question we're looking to answer. Why has everything else evolved and that hasn't?
Makes sense. So, Andrew, what are some of the benefits that you have seen from introducing what are the tangible benefits that you actually saw in your own business and in helping others implement that?
Well, first of all, productivity goes up about 25%. Who'd have thought? So it doesn't just stay the same, it goes up. What you then find in most companies is your power bills, your heat, your light, the size of your premises goes down. So there's cost saves. Sick days half. Number of people applying to your company goes up. Turnover goes through the floor. In one particular instance, they had, in a very highly competitive industry, they hadn't got anybody leave in about 18 months. And it's unheard of because you are giving people something that you can't put a value on. We spend our time trying to evaluate how much we have to pay people. And surprise, surprise, what we're finding is that when you give people more time off, they value it far more than the amount of money you're ever going to pay them. About 15% of employees who've gone to a 4-day week, when asked, say, you can't pay me enough to go back to 5 days a week. Right. And that's the game here, because at its heart, I'm giving you the chance to be a better you, a chance to spend more time with your family, maybe pick up some care responsibilities, maybe get yourself fit, maybe volunteer. All of these things that I can't do because I don't have enough time, I'm giving you that time. And then in return, I'm asking that we hit our productivity, profitability, output targets. That's it. That's the deal. I win, you win. And the extraordinary, well, no, it isn't extraordinary. Who'd have thought that healthier, happier, more engaged, more motivated staff would be more productive? Hey, I'm going out on a limb here. I don't know why that happens.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. No, Andrew, this has been a great conversation because it's definitely, it's the bottom line here is that we have the ability, we start with culture and we have the willingness of people. I mean, obviously that's what people want. The ability to not compromise your productivity because you are measuring it and that you are taking, it's not even a risk. It's not even a calculated risk because you know that you're not going to lose on productivity. On the contrary, you probably will go up per your statistics. And then you have to make sure that you are designing the business, and it's a great opportunity look for efficiency and ability to basically to increase efficiency in a way that you haven't thought about before, because then it will be still productive. So amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing this. I mean, you are definitely the evangelist of it. I understand why, but accidental, as you said. And if people want to hear more or find out more about you in the 4-day week, where should they go?
Well, first of all, go to the website, 4dayweek.com, for the number. That has lots of stuff. I wrote a book because I couldn't drink that much coffee with chief executives. So the 4-day week is a book that's out there. And look, there are lots of research now that's out. We do global trials. Join a trial, and it's a great way to safely implement a 4-day week in your business. The biggest risk most companies have got is not trying a 4-day week. The biggest risk is their biggest competitor does it first.
It's true. Absolutely. Words of wisdom. Well, thank you so much, Andrew. And definitely good luck on your trip.
Thank you.
From Beijing to Paris in 36 days. I love it. That's amazing.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.